I froze, the words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. Lisa, I can't live without her, Frank had just blurted out, his eyes darting nervously around our living room. My husband of 15 years, the man I thought I knew inside and out, was talking about his mother as if she were oxygen. What do you mean, Frank? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We'd been discussing our dream home, the one we'd saved for years to buy. Now, with the down payment finally within reach, I thought we were on the cusp of our happily ever after. Frank's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Mom, she needs to move in with us when we get the new place. She can't manage on her own anymore. I felt the blood drain from my face. Miriam, my mother-in-law, living with us? The woman who criticized my cooking, my cleaning, my very existence? Frank, we never discussed this. What about our plans for a family? He reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We can still have kids, Lisa. Mom can help with babysitting. It'll be perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in my mind, mocking me. I stood up, needing to put distance between us. And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this grand plan? I didn't know how, Frank stammered. I knew you'd be upset. Upset? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Frank, this isn't just about being upset. This is about our future, our marriage. How could you make such a huge decision without me? As I looked at my husband, I saw him not as the strong partner I thought I had, but as a little boy still tethered to his mother's apron strings. In that moment, I realized our marriage had cracks I'd been blind to for far too long. We need to talk about this, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Really talk, Frank. Because right now, I'm not sure I recognize the man I married. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Saturday morning, and I hadn't even finished my coffee. I opened the door to find Miriam, Frank's mother, standing there with a wide smile and several bulging shopping bags. Surprise, dear, she chirped, brushing past me into our apartment. I thought I'd pop by and help you plan for the new house. I stood frozen, my mouth agape. This was the third weekend in a row she'd shown up unannounced. Frank appeared from the bedroom, looking sheepish. Mom, he said weakly, we weren't expecting you. Miriam waved her hand dismissively. Oh, nonsense. I'm family. Now, I've brought some catalogs for furniture. I was thinking we could convert that spare room you wanted as an office into my bedroom. It has the best view after all. I felt my blood pressure rising. Miriam, we haven't even closed on the house yet. And we had plans for that room. Plans change, dear, she interrupted, patting my arm condescendingly. Now, where shall we start? Kitchen? I have some lovely ideas for new cabinets. I looked at Frank, silently pleading for him to say something, anything. But he just stood there, avoiding my gaze. Actually, Miriam, I said, finding my voice, Frank and I have plans today. We can't entertain right now. Miriam's face fell, but only for a moment. Well, I'll just leave these catalogs with you then. Frank, be a dear and help me bring in the rest of the bags from the car. As they left, I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. This couldn't go on. When Frank returned, I confronted him. We need to talk about your mother, I said firmly. Frank sighed. Lisa, she's just trying to help. Help? Frank, she's taking over our lives. We need boundaries. You're being unreasonable, he snapped. She's family. We can't just shut her out. I felt like I'd been slapped. Unreasonable? I'm unreasonable for wanting our own space? Frank's face softened. I didn't mean it like that. Look, let's just give it some time. It'll work out. But as I watched him retreat to the bedroom, I felt more alone than ever. Cracks in our marriage were widening, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on before everything shattered. I was sorting through our mail when I stumbled upon an envelope addressed to Frank from a real estate agency. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. My heart sank as I read the contents. It was a list of properties, all with mother-in-law suites or separate guest houses. properties we'd never discussed. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica, my best friend. Saw Miriam at the coffee shop with a realtor. Everything okay? My hand shook as I dialed Frank's number. He answered on the third ring. Frank, we need to talk. Now. Lisa, I'm in a meeting. Can it wait? No, it can't, I snapped. I know about the houses. And your mother's been meeting with realtors behind my back. There was a long pause. I can explain, he finally said. You'd better, I replied, hanging up. An hour later, Frank walked through the door, looking defeated. How long has this been going on? I demanded. He sighed. Mom's been looking at houses for a few weeks. She thought she was helping. Helping? I scoffed. Frank, she's hijacking our future. And you're letting her. She means well, Lisa. She just wants to be close to us. I felt my anger rising. And what about what I want? What about our plans? Does any of that matter to you? Frank's face hardened. Of course it does. But she's my mother, Lisa. I can't just cut her out. I'm not asking you to cut her out, I said, my voice breaking. I'm asking you to stand up to her. To choose us. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. In that moment, I saw our future crumbling before me. Frank, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, if you can't set boundaries with your mother, I don't know if I can do this anymore. His head snapped up, eyes wide with fear. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I'm saying you need to make a choice. Either you tell your mother to back off and respect our boundaries, or what? He asked, his voice trembling. Or I'm done, I said, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. Frank stared at me, shock and disbelief etched across his face. As the silence stretched on, I realized with a sinking heart that his hesitation was all the answer I needed. The tension in our apartment was suffocating. Frank had been tiptoeing around me for days, and I was at my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. We need to talk, I said, cornering him in the kitchen. Now. Frank's eyes darted nervously. Lisa, no excuses, I cut him off. It's time to make a decision, Frank. Either you tell your mother to back off or I'm leaving. His face paled. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life, I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I can't live like this anymore. Your mother is suffocating us, and you're letting her. Frank ran his hands through his hair, looking lost. She's my mother, Lisa. I can't just... Can't what? Set boundaries? Be an adult? I felt my anger rising. I'm your wife, Frank. We're supposed to be partners. But right now, I feel like I'm fighting this battle alone. Just then, the doorbell rang. We both froze, knowing exactly who it was. Don't, I warned as Frank moved towards the door. But he opened it anyway, revealing Miriam standing there with a bright smile and another armload of home decor catalogs. Hello, dears, she chirped, breezing past us. I've had the most wonderful idea for the new house. I think we should... No, I said firmly, surprising even myself. There is no we, Miriam. This is our house, mine and Frank's. Not yours. Miriam's smile faltered. Now, Lisa, don't be difficult. I'm only trying to help. I turned to Frank, my heart pounding. Tell her, Frank. Tell her she can't live with us. Tell her we need our space.
Frank looked between us, panic clear on his face. The silence stretched on, unbearable. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I think maybe we should dash. Oh, nonsense, Miriam interrupted. Frank, dear, you know you need me. Who else will take care of you both? I felt something snap inside me. We're adults, Miriam. We don't need a caretaker. We need our own life. I turned to Frank one last time, silently pleading. But as I watched him shrink under his mother's gaze, I knew. In that moment, I made my decision. I'll be at my parents', I said, my voice barely above a whisper. When you're ready to be a husband instead of a son, you know where to find me. As I walked out the door, leaving Frank and Miriam in stunned silence, I felt a mix of heartbreak and strange relief. The ball was in Frank's court now. I just hoped he'd make the right choice before it was too late. I'd been staying at my parents' house for 3 days when Frank finally called. His voice was strained, pleading. "Lisa, please come home. We need to talk." Reluctantly, I agreed. When I arrived at our apartment, I froze in the doorway. The place was unrecognizable. Miriam had completely rearranged our furniture, hung new curtains, and plastered the walls with family photos, mostly of her and Frank. "What is this?" I whispered, horrified. Frank emerged from the kitchen, looking sheepish. Mom thought she wanted to surprise us. Surprise us? I felt my anger rising. "Frank, this isn't her home." Before he could respond, Miriam bustled in from the spare room, beaming. "Lisa dear, what do you think of the changes? I've been working so hard to make this place feel like a real home. I couldn't breathe. This was too much." "Miriam, you had no right, Dash." Now, she interrupted, patting my arm condescendingly. "I know change can be difficult, but you'll get used to it. Won't she, Frank?" I turned to my husband, silently begging him to stand up to his mother. But he just stood there, avoiding my gaze. "Actually," Miriam continued, "I have wonderful news. I've decided to move in permanently. I've already given notice on my apartment." The room spun. I grabbed the wall for support. "What?" Frank finally spoke up. "Mom, we haven't discussed Dash." "Oh, there's nothing to discuss," Miriam waved him off. "It's all arranged. I'll take the spare room, of course. You two can keep the master bedroom, for now." I couldn't take it anymore. "No," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Absolutely not." Miriam's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon? You're not moving in, Miriam. This is our home, mine and Frank's. You need to leave. Now." The room fell silent. Frank looked panicked, his eyes darting between his mother and me. Miriam's face hardened. "Frank, are you going to let her speak to me like this?" I held my breath, waiting for Frank's response. This was it, the moment of truth. But Frank remained silent, frozen in indecision. In that moment, I knew. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't fight this battle alone. "I'll be back tomorrow to pack my things," I said quietly, turning towards the door. "Lisa, wait, Dash," Frank started, but I cut him off. "No, Frank. I'm done waiting. When you decide whether you want to be a husband or a son, let me know. But I won't live like this anymore." As I walked out, leaving Frank and Miriam behind, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this. I collapsed onto my childhood bed, tears streaming down my face. My mother, Sarah, sat beside me, her hand gently rubbing my back. "Oh, sweetheart," she sighed. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." I looked up at her, my vision blurry. "How did you do it, Mom? How did you handle Dad's mother?" Sarah's eyes clouded with a distant memory. "It wasn't easy, Lisa. Your grandmother was challenging, but your father stood by me. That made all the difference." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Frank hadn't stood by me. He'd let his mother steamroll over our life, our dreams. "I don't know if I can go back," I whispered. Mom squeezed my hand. "Listen, I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone." I sat up, wiping my eyes. "What is it?" "I almost left your father once," she said, her voice barely audible. "His mother had moved in with us, just after you were born. She criticized everything I did, tried to take over raising you." I felt erased. I gasped. I'd never known this about my parents. They'd always seemed so solid, so united. "What happened?" I asked. "I packed my bags one night, ready to leave," Mom continued. "But your father caught me. He begged me to stay, promised he'd make things right. And he did. He stood up to his mother, set clear boundaries. It wasn't easy, but he chose us, you and me, over her demands." I felt a glimmer of hope, quickly extinguished by reality. "Frank's not Dad, though. He can't even tell Miriam no." Mom nodded sadly. "You're right. And that's why you need to decide what you want, Lisa. Not what Frank wants, not what Miriam wants. What do you want? I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. What did I want? A life free from Miriam's constant interference. A husband who put our relationship first. A home that was truly ours. I want my life back, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I want Frank to choose me, to stand up for us. And if he can't, then maybe it's time I stood up for myself. Mom hugged me tightly. That's my girl. You deserve happiness, Lisa. Don't ever forget that. As I hugged her back, I felt a surge of determination. I knew what I had to do. It was time to confront Frank and Miriam once and for all. Whatever the outcome, I would no longer be a passive player in my own life. It was time to take control. I stood outside our apartment door, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath and walked in. Frank and Miriam were sitting on the couch, their heads snapping up as I entered. Frank jumped to his feet, relief washing over his face. Lisa, you're back. I've been so worried, Dash. I held up my hand, silencing him. We need to talk. All of us. Miriam's eyes narrowed. Now, Lisa dear, I think you're overreacting, Dash. No, I said firmly. I'm not overreacting and I'm not, dear. This ends now, Miriam. You need to leave. Today. Frank's face paled. Lisa, please, can't we discuss this? I turned to him, my resolve strengthening. There's nothing to discuss, Frank. It's time to choose. Your mother or me. The room fell silent. I could see the panic in Frank's eyes as he looked between Miriam and me. Miriam stood up, her face twisted with anger. How dare you? After everything I've done for you both. Done for us. I laughed bitterly. You've done nothing but try to control our lives, Miriam. It stops now. Frank finally found his voice. Mom, I think Lisa's right. You need to go. Miriam gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Frank, how can you say that? After all I've sacrificed for you. Sacrificed? I asked, suspicion growing. What are you talking about? Miriam's eyes glinted with malice. Go on, Frank. Tell her. Tell her how you've been supporting me financially for years. Tell her about the money you've been sending me every month behind her back. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stared at Frank, disbelief and betrayal washing over me. Is this true? Frank's shoulders slumped in defeat. Lisa, I can explain, Dash. But I didn't want to hear it. The lies, the deceit. It was all too much. I felt something inside me snap. I want a divorce, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Frank's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. What? No, Lisa, please, Dash. It's over, Frank, I said, tears threatening to spill. I can't do this anymore. I won't. As I turned to leave, Miriam's triumphant smirk made my blood boil. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I walked out, my head held high, leaving Frank and Miriam to deal with the mess they'd created. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and liberation. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was mine to shape. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure: I was done living in Miriam's shadow. I sat across from my father in his study, my hands trembling as I clutched a mug of tea. The events of the past few days swirled in my mind like a tempest. I'm getting a divorce, Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. George leaned forward, his eyes filled with concern. Are you sure about this, Lisa? I nodded, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. I have to. Frank's betrayal, it's too much. He's been secretly supporting Miriam for years, lying to me all this time. Dad's face hardened. That's unacceptable. You deserve better, sweetheart. But what about work? I asked, voicing my biggest fear. I've built my career at your company. If Frank and I split. To my surprise, Dad chuckled. Lisa, you've earned your place in this company through hard work and talent. Your personal life doesn't change that. In fact, he paused, a glimmer in his eye. I've been meaning to talk to you about a promotion. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Really? Really, he affirmed. You're one of our best, Lisa. Don't ever doubt that. Tears welled up in my eyes, but for the first time in months, they were tears of joy and relief. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I filed for divorce, moved into my own apartment, and threw myself into work. It wasn't easy, But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more like myself. One evening, as I was packing up at the office, my friend Jessica stopped by my desk. "How are you holding up?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. I smiled, realizing I meant it. "I'm good, Jess. Really good." She beamed. "I'm so proud of you, Lisa. You've come so far." As we walked out together, I felt a surge of gratitude for the people in my life who truly cared about me. My parents, Jessica, my colleagues, they had all rallied around me, showing me what real support looked like. I thought about Frank and Miriam, wondering how they were coping with the fallout of their actions. But for the first time, I felt no anger, no bitterness. Just a sense of peace and closure. As I drove home to my new apartment, I realized something profound. The dream home I had once envisioned with Frank paled in comparison to the life I was building for myself now. A life of independence, self-respect, and genuine relationships. I was no longer living in anyone's shadow. I was standing in my own light, and it felt glorious. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. And I was ready to embrace every single one of them.